when Malcolm Reed, a successful African-American entrepreneur known for his discreet demeanor and sharp business acumen, stepped through the glass doors of the prestigious Silvercrest Grand Hotel. He anticipated a standard welcome, the kind reserved for esteemed guests of such an upscale establishment. What he encountered instead was a chilling reception that would test not only his patience, but his resolve. Without even the courtesy of verifying his reservation, the hotel's manager, a man who prided himself on his ability to read people, dismissed Malcolm with disdain, assuming he was an outsider who did not belong. What happened next, when the truth emerged, left everyone in stunned silence. But to fully understand this moment, we must start at the beginning. Morning at Silvercrest Grand. Each day at the Silvercrest Grand Hotel began with a sense of purpose. Situated in the heart of a thriving metropolis, this five-star hotel was synonymous with elegance and exclusivity. The staff operated like clockwork, meticulously arranging fresh flowers in antique vases, polishing the gleaming marble floors, and ensuring that the crystal chandeliers sparkled like stars caught in daylight. It was a place where the affluent expected flawless service and uncompromising standards. Overseeing the hotel's operations was Edward Langston, the general manager. A man in his late 50s, Edward was known for his precision and discipline. He wore perfectly tailored suits and exuded a quiet authority that none of his staff dared question. For over 2 decades, Edward had cultivated an image of being a guardian of the hotel's esteemed reputation. But beneath his courteous exterior was a man who had built an invisible wall, drawing sharp lines between those he believed belonged and those he believed did not. An unexpected guest. On a crisp spring morning, as the bellhops in their immaculate uniforms unloaded designer luggage from sleek cars, a man walked through the revolving doors of Silvercrest Grand. He was Malcolm Reed, a man in his late 30s, dressed in a finely cut charcoal gray suit. His posture was upright, his steps measured and confident. Yet, there was something about him that made Edward's eyes narrow. There was no flashy watch on his wrist, no assistant shadowing his steps, no valet following behind with his luggage. To Edward, these were red flags. Edward stepped closer to the reception desk, watching intently as Malcolm approached the front counter. Without a moment's hesitation, Malcolm offered a polite smile to the receptionist and said in a steady, calm voice, "Good morning. I have a reservation under the name Malcolm Reed." But Edward was already moving in, cutting off his receptionist before she could respond. With a dismissive wave of his hand, Edward interjected, "I'm sorry, sir, but this establishment maintains a very particular standard. You may wish to seek accommodation elsewhere." His tone was cold. His words, though framed in formality, dripped with condescension. Edward hadn't checked the reservation system. He didn't need to, he told himself. His instincts were never wrong. Dignity under fire. Malcolm was no stranger to these moments. They had punctuated his life, from his early days as a young lawyer to his current role as a respected businessman with holdings in real estate, technology, and hospitality. He stood quietly for a moment, absorbing the insult, his gaze steady as he studied Edward. "I believe you should take a moment to verify the reservation," Malcolm suggested evenly, his voice giving no hint of the indignation rising within him. But Edward shook his head slowly, already turning away. "I must ask you to leave," Edward said firmly. "This isn't a place where outsiders typically find comfort." The word outsiders hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The lobby, moments ago alive with polite conversation and the gentle clinking of cutlery from the breakfast buffet, grew silent. A few staff members exchanged glances. Some had witnessed Edward's biases before, but this felt different. This was not a subtle slight. It was blatant, undeniable discrimination. Malcolm's heart pounded in his chest, not out of fear, but out of righteous fury restrained by years of discipline. He took a slow breath, willing his emotions into order. "You still have an opportunity to correct this," he said quietly. Edward's lip curled in what could only be described as a sneer. "I'm sure you think you're someone important," he said. "But not here." The phone call. Without another word, Malcolm reached into his inner jacket pocket and took out his phone. His movements were deliberate, not rushed. With a few swift taps, he made a call. Across the polished floor, Edward stiffened. Was this man calling someone to complain? Perhaps to make a scene? It didn't matter, Edward thought. Security was nearby. He'd had troublesome guests removed before. But Malcolm wasn't calling for help. He was calling for clarity, an arrival that changed everything. Minutes later, the silence in the lobby was broken by the sound of firm, measured footsteps. A man in a midnight blue suit entered through the main doors. His presence was commanding. He carried a briefcase in one hand, and his expression was serious, professional. He crossed the floor directly to the reception desk, where Edward and Malcolm stood. "Mr. Langston," the man said, addressing Edward by name, "my name is Victor Allen, legal counsel for Mr. Malcolm Reed." He opened his briefcase and drew out a folder, placing it neatly on the marble counter. "Effective immediately, Mr. Reed is the new principal owner of Silvercrest Grand Hotel," Victor said, sliding the official documents toward Edward. "These papers have been filed and approved by the relevant authorities. As of this morning, Mr. Reed has full executive control of this property." The color drained from Edward's face. His mind raced, struggling to comprehend what had just been said. The man he had dismissed, insulted, and belittled was, in fact, his new employer, his new boss. Worse, the owner of the very establishment Edward had treated as his personal kingdom. Shocking consequences. The buzz of whispered conversations swept through the lobby like wildfire. Staff members turned to one another, stunned. Guests who had observed the earlier exchange now watched in fascination as the balance of power shifted with undeniable finality. Malcolm turned slowly to Edward. His expression remained composed, but there was a weight behind his gaze. Not anger, not even pity, just disappointment. "I expected better," Malcolm said quietly. His voice was even, controlled. From a man entrusted with representing this hotel. Edward opened his mouth, but no words came. Finally, he forced out, "Mr. Reed, this was a misunderstanding." "No," Malcolm replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It wasn't." There was a long silence. "I'm giving you the opportunity," Malcolm continued, "to leave with dignity. Gather your things. Your tenure here is over." The fall of Edward Langston. Edward's pride was shattered. Without protest, he nodded. He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy, his figure diminished. Staff members parted silently to let him pass, some avoiding his gaze, others staring at the man who had once commanded such fear, now broken. But for Malcolm, this was not merely about removing one man. It was about changing an entire system. A new era begins. The following morning, Malcolm convened a meeting with every employee of Silvercrest Grand. The vast ballroom, usually reserved for elegant galas, was filled with the hotel's staff. The room, draped in crystal and velvet, was silent as Malcolm stepped forward. "I bought this hotel not just as an investment," Malcolm began. His voice was clear, firm. "I bought it to make it better." He let his words hang for a moment before continuing. "For years, Silvercrest Grand has been known as a place of luxury. But true luxury doesn't come from chandeliers and marble floors. It comes from how we treat people. Every person." He scanned the room. Some staff members looked ashamed, others curious, all of them listening. "This hotel," Malcolm said, "will be a place where respect is non-negotiable. We will no longer judge anyone based on appearance, race, or perceived status. Every guest, whether they arrive in a limousine or on foot, deserves the same courtesy and care." Rebuilding from the ground up. Under Malcolm's leadership, sweeping changes were implemented. New diversity and inclusion training programs were introduced. Hiring practices were overhauled. An anonymous reporting system was established to ensure that discrimination at any level would be swiftly addressed. Some employees chose to leave, unable or unwilling to adapt to the new culture. But those who stayed found a workplace transformed. The tension that had once haunted the hallways was replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Guests began to notice the difference, too. Reviews spoke of not just impeccable service, but a welcoming atmosphere that made all feel valued. Malcolm's message. Months after the incident, Silvercrest Grand Hotel had become not just a symbol of elegance, but a beacon of progress. One afternoon, during a charity gala hosted in the hotel's grand ballroom, Malcolm took the stage. He spoke not of his business successes, but of the importance of dignity. "What happened here," he said, "wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. If we can change the story here, maybe we can inspire change elsewhere." His words resonated deeply. The applause that followed was not just for him, but for what the hotel had become. Epilogue. Edward Langston faded into obscurity, his fall a cautionary tale for those who let prejudice cloud their judgment. But Malcolm Reed's story became legend, not because he owned a hotel, but because he redefined what true ownership meant. Not the ownership of property, but the ownership of values, of integrity, respect, and equality. Silvercrest Grand thrived under Malcolm's stewardship, its legacy not just of opulence, but of justice. And for every guest who walked through its doors, that legacy was clear from the very first greeting. "Welcome. You belong here."